Nobody has ever worked harder at avoiding to learn a new skill than me. This is my attempt to take 300 blocks of wood, glue them together, and then shape them into what I'm hoping resembles a cabinet, just because I don't know how to build cabinets. For the last year or so, I've been saving all of my offcuts and cutting them into nice stackable blocks, and my original idea was I was going to use those blocks to create something like this cabinet when the time comes. However, when I started doing the math on this cabinet, I realized I was going to need way more blocks. So I reached out to Gobi Walnut and said, hey, I need about 300 1.5 by 1.5 by 18-inch long walnut blocks. Can you help me out? And they kind of chuckled, asked a couple questions, but said, yeah, we got you. When I was building this, somebody asked if I was trying to build a cutting board and things just got out of hand. And that gave me a pretty good little chuckle because, yeah, this is pretty much exactly how cutting boards start out. I just made a lot more of them. This whole build started with a drawing, and it actually started with several drawings. The first couple drawings I am not particularly proud of, but the last drawing was pretty decent, and I used that as a scale reference, so when I was gluing these sides up, I could know exactly what the angle was going to be, or at least close to what the angle was going to be, and I found that for the most part, the angles in this build were about 7 degrees, which is what you see those blocks cut to there, and having that 7-degree tilt on both sides really made everything go much more smoothly. My original idea was just to stack blocks up in kind of a random pattern and then carve them into a cool shape, and I think that would have ended in disaster because this was actually really nice and symmetrical in the end. You probably noticed that a few of those blocks I started with the brad nails, but since I'm going to be carving this down, I didn't want to run into a bunch of nails later, so after those starter blocks, pretty much every piece was attached with just clamps, which was, yeah, just as time consuming as you might think, and now it's time to start carving, which we'll ignore my chainsaw skills for a second, and here is the angle grinder, and we're just whittling it down. I have this Festool power planer, I have a regular hand plane. The entire process was so time consuming, I just had to throw every tool I had at my disposal at carving this to hopefully what resembles a cabinet. This was unquestionably my most time-consuming project. I feel like some makers, myself included, might exaggerate how long things take us sometimes. We might say, oh, I spent days sanding this table, but what we really meant is I spent 2 hours one day and then 2 hours the next day, which apparently is much different than this one because I spent about 12 to 14 days between the carving and the sanding of this project. It was absolute agony. After I was mostly done sanding, I was ready to start fixing some of my earlier mistakes, and worst of all are these brad nails that were exposed. These will not do at all, and never seen anybody try to fix it just like this, but this is what I came up with. I made a little jig there, a 1/4-inch bit, and I just drilled out the nails themselves, and then I got some 1/4-inch plugs, and then just hammered them in there. And the goal with any woodworking fix is never that you absolutely can't find it if you know where it is. You really just want to, if you're walking by, somebody doesn't look down and go, oh my God, what happened there? And we'll see if I did a good enough job here. I did use a little bit of wood dust to kind of help fill in any of those micro gaps because there was a little bit of tear out with that drill bit. Got that wedge cut off, used the 120 grit, and at this point I was really optimistic, but here's how it looked in the end. All right, now for the fun part. This is for the back of the cabinet. I knew I didn't want to do just some boring old traditional plywood, so what I originally was going to do was copper, but when I did my first panel, it actually looked horrible. So this is just regular steel from Lowe's, and got a regular 3-pound sledge, I think from Lowe's or Home Depot, and I actually love the way this looks, but I think we can make it match a little bit better with this walnut, and to do that, this is perma-blue. I've played around a little bit in the past with this. I'm not an expert on it, but it's like an oxidizing agent. It's something that like was originally used on guns, where you hear about gun bluing or gunmetal. This is the color they're talking about, and I think that this is going to pair really nicely with the walnut. This is the first new finish that I've used on one of my projects in years. For the last several years, I've been using Rubio Monaco, and they've never sponsored me, but they just make a good product, so I kept using it on my personal projects. This is a finish by Vesting, and it's pretty similar to Rubio in the color and the application, but here's why it is such a freaking game changer for me. This is UV cured, so you wipe it on, wipe it off, hit it with a lamp, and it is 100% cured. And I don't mean like wait another week before you expose it to water. it is fully cured, which means you can put the N3 on it right away, which normally took like a week before I could apply the N3. So this is why it is such a game changer for me. And here's how it looks in the end. This is actually my favorite project. This was my most difficult project, which might factor into why it's my favorite. Also added some lights, which was a pretty cool process. And I'd love to know what you think of it because I really, really like it.